great. Of art in Austria and in Graz over the last half century, I think, thereabouts. Particularly from the Graz school in the 1970s, that kind of radical movement, and how perhaps it's evolved into something with a quite a different set of concerns which I guess we all share. So, yeah, welcome, and thank you very much.
Thank you. So I hope I drank enough wine to be capable to speak fluently in English, but I wrote something down. I'll do my very best because I'm not the language professional. Therefore, I try to give you an impression, because when I talked to Simon and what I should talk about, immediately was interested in this founding area of the House of Architecture. The House of Architecture is one of it is the first of its kind in Austria. It was founded in 1988. And the reason was the creative scene that existed from the 60s on in Graz. It was also a kind of revolutionary approach to the arts and everything, interdisciplinary, and they founded this House of Architecture. And the good thing about it is that every province in Austria now has a kind of House of Architecture that is also communicating architecture and trying also to evolve Baukultur. Yeah, you know, Baukultur is this common word, I think, also in English, which is high quality architecture of today. Yeah, I don't know.
Not much of it.
Yeah.
No, we don't have
Okay. Yeah, and that's what I thought might be interesting, because there's also a very strong relation to London, actually. So, as I said, the House of Architecture was founded in 1988, and it can be found, we are talking about space, in this palais, this old palais, called Palais Tinfeld, that was built in about 20 years in the 18th century, and we are in the ground floor. On the back side, I will tell you later. We have a really nice neighbor, but the House of Architecture is a non-profit organization, and as I said, it will foster communication on recent architecture, high quality building culture, shall foster dialogue and awareness for our living environment in and between different groups and professions, like in the field of culture, social policy, education policy, economy, also the arts, science, and many more. So this is our space, and the decisive factor for the emergence of one of the first architecture forums was this creative scene, and they met in the Forum Stadtpark, which is the Forum City Park, where they regularly invented themselves and tried to find a new way how the arts and different disciplines of the arts could work together, and networking, and also provoke a new adventure into the future. And this internationally well-known architectural movement that manifested itself at that time was the so-called Grazer Schule, the Graz School, which began in Graz in the 60s and continued into the 90s, or some people say also to 2000. It belongs what the art historians found. And the buildings from this period were noticed far beyond the borders of Austria and are still among the most stylistically influential works of their time in Europe. I don't know if someone of you is familiar with this Grazer Schule. But for those who do not Graz, I would like also to introduce you a little bit to the city. It's in the very east of Austria. With about 300,000 inhabitants today, Graz is the second largest city in Austria. The largest is, of course, Vienna. And it is the capital of the province of Styria. Styria is a very green province. It's also famous for its wine culture in the south of Styria. And it is a country between Italy, Hungary, and Slovenia, as you can see on this map. And due to its location between the Balkans, the Alps, and the Mediterranean, Graz has always been the place for intensive cultural transfer, which found expression in a unique synthesis of different artistic and architectural testimonial within the city fabric. And this is how this city looks like, the center of the city, I have to say, because of course it's much bigger and the periphery is more modern, but the city center in 1999 was listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And this legacy of creativity still characterizes the life of the city through numerous art, culture, theater, and music festivals, many museums, literature, and artist in residence programs. And that's why I'm there, because I love this mixture of different creative, artistic movements. That what you see in the middle is this Schlossberg, Castle Hill, so the really city center, and the old city is then built around it, which you can see here. And also you see this historic roofscape, which is also part of this listed UNESCO World Heritage, because they say this is unique for Europe. And here, maybe you will discover something that is related to London and to your architecture. This is Peter Cook's Kunsthaus, the House of Arts, and it's called the Friendly Alien, as you might know. And this is also typical for Graz, the modern architecture of high design quality that has been integrated in some selected prominent places in the historical urban structure. So, and the House of Architecture is just behind, on the back of this Kunsthaus. So we are neighbors. And we have also a common entrance. Through our buildings, you can enter the other one. So this is a nice joint venture that I really like. And as you might know, the Kunsthaus was completed in 2003. So here are we. So this one on the corner, this old palais is ours. And it was made on the occasion of the City of Culture Festival. And at the other side, on the opposite of the front of the Kunsthaus is the Moor. This is the inside, you will know that all. And the interesting thing about this was also this inspiration from Peter Cook that I will tell you more about later, maybe. And that's then the reason to talk about time, because for the development of the so-called Grazer Schule, Graz School, which began in 1960s, Archigram, and Peter Cook, along with Jona Friedman, Buckminster Fuller, and the Japanese metabolists, played a decisive role. So there's a kind of long-standing relationship to the London architectural scene and to the common spirit of that time. The term Grazer Schule was coined by the Viennese architecture critic Friedrich Achleitner. It is a kind of misleading because we are not talking about teachers and students, and there's also no corporate architectural style. What they have in common is the time spent studying at the Graz University. And they exchanged their inspirations in these so-called Zeichensäle, which are the study rooms or the workshops. And their search for new visionary building structures, new social forms of cohabitation. And the architecture of Graz scene was experimental, sculptural, constructivist, and at the same time deconstructivist. The zeitgeist or spirit of time in the 60s was characterized by a strong optimism. So here are a lot of young people. I don't know if you're familiar with this kind of optimism, the belief in technical progress, that man-made design could shape a better future. Everything seemed to be possible. And it was the time of the first flight to the moon, the hippie culture, Woodstock Festival, flower power, the Beatles came up, the color TV was invented, the art scene celebrated pop art as well as minimal art. This is a piece from Sarah. And the word first freely programmable desk calculator from the Olivetti company was invented. And the first nuclear power plants were connected to the grid to generate electricity. So all was seen very positive. We see it differently today. And Achleitner saw the revolutionary approach of the Graz architectural projects as a counterposition to the academic modernism, which could be found in Vienna at that time. But it was more like a postmodernism, or more like everything had to be beautiful and designed and styled. In opposite the Graz, people experimented with mega structures, with ways of co-determination, new materials, and constructive innovations. The focus was not on beauty, but on the idea of a better common life. Forum was to emerge as an expression of organization, structure, and potential for use. And many of the projects were conceived and planned as coherent spatial systems, which thus pointed beyond the individual architectural project. It was a fortunate circumstance that the politicians in Graz decided on a new housing program in 1972, the so-called Styrian model, provided for restructuring of housing subsidies. The aim was to foster ownership, a mix of young family and old people housing, communal facilities, and co-determination by the latter users. The implementation of open competitions was prescribed in order to allow cost-optimized but simultaneously unconventional solutions. Within this system, it was also possible for young architects to obtain their first commissions. And the content specifications were ideal for the young architects of the Grazer Schule. So you could imagine that also this housing was one of the most common and also famous for this Grazer Schule typical architecture. And many of the projects created at that period of time are still among the most popular housing developments in Graz, and until today important parts of the cityscape. And I'm talking about this very abstract, but I'm trying now to introduce some of the protagonists of the Grazer Schule. I don't show you all of them because some of them say it's like 50 different offices. We don't do that. I just selected a few. And the most famous one is Günther Domenik. You might know him. He was, so the sculptor of the scene. And of course, he studied architecture in Graz. That's why he was in the Grazer Schule, and even after completing his studies, he remained in Graz as main place of activity. He taught also at the Technical University as a professor, and he ran his office from 63 to 75 together with Alfred Huth, another architect. And with this project that you can see here, it was just a vision. It was called New Type of Housing, so Neue Wohnform for Ragnitz, a kind of peripheric little site near to Graz. The two won the Grand Prix d'Urbanisme et d'Architecture in '69 in Cannes. And for that time, this was the international start for them. And they founded their young office and started their common career. After the dissolution of the office partnership with Huth, joint projects and various other office collaborations followed. And in his building, he experimented with different material forms. The sculptures were not only met with applause and were sometimes really hotly debated. Among the most famous buildings are, this one is the multi-purpose hall of the Eggenberg School Sisters in Graz. It's now used as a common dining space for the school. Then this Central Savings Bank branch in Vienna. This is a view into inside, and this is Günther Dominik himself. And as you can see, he had a fable for hands. So I don't know why, but this was one of his main themes. Then his lifetime project was this so-called Steinhaus, the stone house, near a lake, on a site near his hometown. And he built mostly the whole of his life on this project, which is really impressive. It seems very small from the outside, but from the inside it's very interesting. This is actually the main image for today's talk. This is so like the cockpit of the spacecraft that has landed there. From the inside it's really like cozy and warm, but from the outside it looks like something of outer space. And there are a lot of
What's the date of that house?
Sorry?
What is the date of that house?
Oh, it's from 1982 to 2008, so it's a long period where he realized parts of it, and he financed it all himself. And he was always trying to make something differently and changed spaces. So it's a really good place to go. So if you go to Graz, then also you have to see this. This is 1 hour away from Graz, or 1.5 hours. This is the, so to say, the cellar where you can see also a kind of fountain, because water also plays a role in this myth that he's creating. And here you can see also this hand that is grabbing out into the lake, which is also a side of this stone house. And another really famous building of him is this building for the Carinthian Regional Exhibition in the municipality of Hüttenberg. And this is a conversion and expansion of the mining buildings and kilns for the extraction of iron ore in Hüttenberg. And this is really amazing. There are some images, impressions of this house. And I was really, really impressed by this work. And another one is a university building, the so-called Law and Social Science Department of the University of Graz. So maybe you can imagine how he came to his fame, because he is really impressive. His partner, Alfred Huth, he is more the social one, and this is why they couldn't work longer together. And he was then more into this participation housing, and he focused on user-determined living and participatory processes. And this is one example of his housing projects. We're really old photo of the so-called Eschensiedlung, and it's one of the first structural implementations in Graz of his work. You can see also the ground floor plans are not like really boring, but the opposite. And Alfred Huth is considered a co-founder of participation in housing in Austria for that period of time. Totally different is the so-called Werkgruppe Graz, 4 partners. One of those, Eugen Groß, he will present his book next week, I think, or in 2 weeks in our house, because he's still very active. As you can see, he's like almost 90 years old. And they did this project, which is totally different style. It's one of the rare brutalist buildings complexes in Graz. And according to their own statements, they were also strongly influenced by Konrad Wachsmann. I don't know if you know this guy, this architect. And this so-called Terrassenhaussiedlung, so the terraced housing estate, has 522 apartments of different types. So there are terrace apartments, maisonette studio units, roof terrace apartments. Then they have a collective garage for cars with washing places, bicycle storage, garbage room, communication level on the 4th floor, public roof terrace, kindergarten, covered play areas and playgrounds. So the terraced housing development is one of the few residential estate projects of this scale that was actually realized in Graz. And for such a small town, this is something. And it's until today very vibrant, lively. People like to live there because also of this common public space and the possibility to have common ground together. And it reminds me a little bit of the spirit of the Barbican, but it's of course much smaller. So this is a little bit the atmosphere there until today. And then other protagonists are Szyszkowicz-Kowalski architects. Michael Szyszkowicz, of course, studied in Graz, but his partner, Carla Kowalski, she studied in Germany and later at the AA in London. So another coincidence, maybe, I don't know. And they are a little bit younger. They founded their office in the late 80s. This is one of their participation housing projects in Graz, also according to this model that they had, the Styrian model for subsidies for housing, if you have this participational process, and they won the competition. This is also one of the most loved developments for housing in Graz until today. This was built in 1984 in the Alte Poststraße, and they have a really live community there. And this is another building for the university, which they did is the biochemistry and biotechnology building. And this is a Paris center in Ragnitz, which reminds me also a little bit of Dominic's house for the school sisters. And the last protagonist that I want to introduce is Konrad Frey. He studied, of course, also at the Graz University, and that was followed by collaborations with Arab associates in London and the CERN physicist Carl Zankel, among others. And since the early 70s, Frey has experimented with sustainable, energy efficient structures and developed a variety of design for canopies, greenhouses, membranes, and other climate active building envelopes. Frey devoted himself to researching alternative energy sources, especially in solar architecture, beginning in 1974, and experimented with solar collectors of his own design and innovative system for solar energy storage. For that time, this was really something special and not as today common. Everybody not did it, but just he was one that was really reaching out for this theme from himself. And this one, this image is the solar shower for alpine herdsmen on an alm on a mountain, 1,200 meters above the sea level, and consists of a spiral wall made of wood and bark and an industrial heater that functions as a solar collector. So something that was built by themselves, not could have been bought in a shop or so. And in 1976, he built the Sankel house that is in Prévessin, I don't know where that is exactly. And the hall served as a passive thermal zone covered with transparent plastic sheets. And in collaboration with the Sankel, he developed an experimental system in which the entire south facade of the building, which you can be seen here, functions as a solar collector. And also they built this themselves, just with aluminum foil and plastic and black color and so. And then the other thing is this is the scheme of the Fischer House at Grundlsee, and is considered the first prototype of a solar house in Austria, in which the collectors are an integral part of the wall construction of the south facade. So what I really like about him is that he was, for me, one of the pioneers for our time today. And he also invented statistics, did basic empirical research, then started this energy consulting company in Styria, which is also until today one of the most influential companies for advising people for energy questions. And I have here a quote from Konrad Frey, what he said about the time of the Grazer Schule. He said it in 2013, so long after the Grazer Schule has had their high, how to say, the peak. Yeah, exactly. So he said, we were personally engaged and excited by the changes and innovations in the world around, interested in current science and futurology, and all the more frustrated that our own discipline was stuck in the old self-image. Architecture equals building, and that must be solid, durable, and beautiful. Even in the mainstream architecture of the time, although seemingly modern in form and material, we saw rigidity, clumsiness, too long-lastingness. Buildings were often obsolete by the time they were put into service. The world was clogged with unusable buildings. We saw that architects were hardly in demand. So we looked for new strategies to be an architect. So I don't know what you think about this quote, but for me, it has a lot to do with our current situation. And that's what fascinates me about this Graz school and the pioneers that were also thinking about the future, wanted a new approach for the profession. So I don't tell you anything new when I say that we have now other challenges as in the 60s, but the solutions may be a little bit, can be solved with maybe a little bit of the same spirit as the Grazer Schule, and that's what I love about it. So, of course, this includes, this climate change, need of use of this energy and energy-saving models, and the statistics prove that the construction industry is responsible for around 40% of the global CO2 emissions. You might all know that, so it's also nothing new, and that we are in an urgent need for action here if we want to achieve the climate targets of keeping global warming as low as possible. I'm not longer talking about this 1.5 degree target because the experts already doubt that it is possible. But who, if not we, the architects, landscape designers, and urban planners, have the skills to tackle these challenges, to develop new solutions together? In close collaboration with science and research, and also interdisciplinary with others like the arts, maybe. But unfortunately, the framework conditions to change processes and methods in the construction industry are more difficult than ever. A profit-oriented construction industry and cumbersome building legislations prevent urgently overdue amendments. And what we can learn from the architects of the Grazer Schule is their absolute willingness to experiment and the urge to shape the future in a reasonable way. And this unflinching will should infect us all today again. So we need this thinking in complex structures, in social as well as in spatial formations which are mutually dependent and influence each other. So I'm advocating for a pinch of this revolutionary self-understanding and the search for maybe a new utopia or maybe just new strategies. Only through further experiments and modified construction methods can we arrive at the new solutions that we need today. There are already many possible solutions on the table, and as an example, I show you some projects from the exhibition Material Loops, which I curated for the House of Architecture in 2021. So I'm coming to today's work that I do. And these realized role models from Europe show that the building differently and building in circles, it's possible. What is missing are new building laws to make this possible on a broader scale. So the first project that we had in the exhibition, I don't show every example, but just a selection. This is from Rotterdam's Superuse Studio. And as you know, the Netherlands are leading with wind energy, but the rotor blades, after a time, they are kind of garbage, and they have thousands of this. And Superuse invented to use these old rotor blades to create a playground for children. And they did a lot of different playgrounds in Rotterdam and around. So these are just the numbers, countless numbers, how many rotor blades they have. And another project of the office Superuse is this villa. The facade is made of old cable drums because the wood, this is from cable drums. And also inside the static construction of the villa is made from used iron beams from a nearby abandoned industrial building. So this is also one of the laws for the circular economy, that you take the materials from nearby resources, so not to transport it over the ocean or wherever, but just from yeah, around. And there you can see the cable drums and the iron beams. Another example is from Switzerland. I don't know if you are familiar with the architecture office in situ. The Latin name says that they take as much as possible in this site. So this is an old commercial building which is now reused and contains cultural and educational use as well as a small business. You can see that they cut it kind of little road into this former industrial building. On the right hand side there's a school, and on the left hand side is this cultural multi-use building. And you can see a little bit of the construction here. They have this regional wood from around. Then also these insulation pieces are collected from other construction sites and they reuse it. And also the windows are all used. There's no new window. And this combination looks fascinating also as a facade. A totally different thing, also the appearance, is this circle pavilion in Amsterdam. This was commissioned, so the client is a bank. And as you can see here, they thought about everything. So the reuse of rainwater, how they get energy from solar panels from underneath. They thought of the natural ventilation, about greenery, and of course also for the social impact of this pavilion in Amsterdam. So there are public spaces inside, but as well as also office spaces for the people from the bank. And also the insulation from this building is made of used jeans of the bank employees. So very inventive. And the last example I'm showing you is a kind of a new city district in Bremerhaven in Germany, made from City Förster together with Chancellor. It's a project, but they're now trying to build it up. And I think this is one very good example how to think buildings together, how they function together. And as you can see, this is a really sensitive site because this water is all also protected. And they invented a mixed-use site with production, recreation, and sport facilities. They connected the building energy production net. Some are getting more energy, they can give it to other buildings that can't really produce something. Then they protected the green areas. There are biotopes for plants and insects, water circles, windbreaks. You have cycling paths and pedestrian paths through the whole area. And everything is also connected to public transport to avoid too many cars to go there. So this is the thing that I think we could also follow these examples for our architecture today. And of course, this provokes questions, especially about beauty, because if you reuse buildings, you cannot design a building as before, just as a sculpture or an aesthetic object. You have to think it together with the surrounding. And of course, if you reuse something, you have just to take it like it is, or you can transform it a little bit, but it's not like if you do it very new. So the aesthetic is something that might change, but it's not really ugly. But maybe we change also our perspectives in the view of things. Another thing, this is also from Bremerhaven, so how this feels like if you would be in between these buildings. And another thing that we are working on now in the House of Architecture is our research program. We are part of this LINA family, so-called. It's a EU-funded project, and LINA is a short form of learning, interacting, and networking in architecture. There are 30 cultural institutions involved from 26 countries from all over Europe. And the common theme of the LINA is this architecture and the future of the planet. So that was the task. It's a 3 years program. And we invented that we will do a workshop with young talents from Europe. And we called it the future of building. This is a conference where we found our fellows. We invited them to present themselves, and now we selected 4 offices, very young people, and this is our theme. This is the future of building. The vernacular and the visionary equals future. And what we are doing is a research for new low-tech solutions for the built environment as a result from vernacular and visionary technologies in times of climate change. So one of the recent challenges of our time are the consequences of climate change that can be felt globally almost everywhere today, and this is the extreme weather events that are becoming increasingly common. Statistically, heat waves, storms, and floods are getting more and more intense, and it's likely that these phenomena will continue to increase in frequency in the future. And that's what we try to develop. So our project aims to respond to these actual situations. We want to find out workable solutions by research, combining traditional and new research results in the field of construction methods and materials, bringing together the best of all times to develop kind of new prototypes or methods as a reaction of the current extreme weather situations and circumstances. And the results, I don't know what we will get from them, so I hope for new inventions and new exciting ideas. And the results will be presented in the beginning of 2025 in Graz. So please feel invited to come by. And of course, we do exhibitions, workshops, organize events, talks, lectures, discussions, book presentations, excursions, publication, and so on. And we use the whole range of possibilities to communicate with the public, to foster development and promote quality in architecture. So last but not least, our current exhibition that we are showing now is, we just opened it on the 9th of November. It's the Norwegian architecture office Snohetta from Oslo. You might know them. They are quite well known internationally. The most publicated projects are the library in Alexandria, the opera in Oslo, the new building, the extension for the MoMA in San Francisco, the National September 11 Memorial Pavilion in New York, but also smaller projects in the landscape, such as the Reindeer Observation Station and the Tangestolen Mountain cabins in Norway, just to mention a few. The office philosophy is based on sustainable building methods and interdisciplinary teamwork. The founder, Kjetil Thorsen, graduated in architecture from the Graz University Technology in the early 80s. So that's the circle that I wanted to make, and so thank you for your attention.
Thank you. That's great. I mean, what strikes me slightly, this kind of the conundrum is that the radicalism of the 60s and 70s has been, you know, it feels like we've lost it. It's and the optimism and I wonder how we reclaim that at the same time as, because part of this kind of convergence on what are now very real problems as opposed to proximate questions. How we were talking earlier today about how the architect can actually contribute to this question in a way that engineers can't, because the engineers can make sustainable buildings, but they're not necessarily sustainable buildings we understand or necessarily interesting and wonderful places to
And
be.
they don't think in networks. Fabrics are networks, and if we don't bring the things together, we can't really change anything. And so we are in urgent need, and I have also the feeling, I'm also a trained architect, and I have the feeling that the architects feel just like prisoned in these existing laws. And you get a commission and you make the best out of it, but you don't look really over this project to reach something new. And I think we need a new vision, we need also new ideas, and we need a kind of revolutionary spirit to get things done, because our challenges today, they need us, the architects. Who else should solve these problems? The politicians can't, the engineers can't. We can do a lot of things in collaboration, but we can't solve this alone. So if we don't have this virus that we want to change something, yeah, I don't know if this world exists in 100 years. So yeah, we need to take action.
It's hard to articulate, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
It's part of an observation and part of a question, and I'm much more interested to hear other questions, not necessarily on this subject, but please ask Beate some questions. Should we put the light in? And if we want to grab a beer or a glass of wine. But yes.
Yeah, I suppose I was really encouraged to hear that some of these early housing projects are still super popular, and I suppose that's great to hear in a sense, because at face value they might appear somewhat challenging to kind of standard tastes if you compare to what you showed in the context around. So I suppose I was interested to hear a little bit more about the kind of participatory process that led to that maybe brings people on board with a slightly more radical project maybe for housing.
Yeah, the challenge, I don't know if you're familiar with this participatory processes. That was also the reason why Günter Domenik and Alfred Huth couldn't work together, because Domenik was the one who wanted to be the one who decides how a house looks like. He wanted it to be a piece of art or a sculpture. And Alfred Huth worked together with the people that wanted to move in to their own apartments or houses, and he gave them the freedom to decide how they should look like, or what color they would have, or what kind of roof, and that was impossible together with Günter Domenik. And this is also not so easy if you have a certain kind of aesthetic that you want to reach to, if you're working together with people that have no education in art also, then it's not so easy to come together to a common idea of how this should look like. And this is challenging, and not everybody has also the patience to do so, of course.
Do you know what techniques they were, in terms of participation?
I think there's no recipe, like, because all the
right
personalities.
What
they tried.
Yeah, what did they try? Do you know?
Because the same processes in the UK, processes in the UK tend to lead to very different results to what you showed.
Yeah. Sure.
No, it's talented sharpness as well. No, but I suppose this is like stylistically that some of the projects that draw towards deconstruction, like the Günter Domenik projects. I mean, there is a kind of open-endedness in that aesthetic language, which I suppose is maybe more
Yeah, but I think
forgiving of some of the
this aesthetic language is not the most interesting point for me, because this is also a kind of its time, an expression of that spirit of the time. But the behind these ideas, this is something that we could also take over today, and maybe the appearance would look totally different, but the process or the idea that what we want to long for is the same.
Do the visionaries work in the UNESCO city centre? Do they want to work
Of
in the
course not.
UNESCO city centre?
No.
Are they more comfortable working, making architectural landscapes in the peripheral landscape? What's this dialogue?
Yeah, the problem.
And when you bring in the environment, you have networks of transport, distribution, which make the existing city the city of the future. So if because it's there and because there's a lot of energy gone into making these networks and sustaining these networks. And so where does the kind of, I'm curious where the visionary vernacular connects back into the
this is exactly the point, because I would maybe compare Graz to this sunny side up egg, because you have the city center. This is UNESCO World Heritage, and this is more or less done. It's more or less untouchable, because otherwise you get in trouble with this UNESCO people. But this white around this yellow, this is of course not as well designed, not as of course, but it is not as well designed as the Middle Age Center. And there are a lot of these Grazer Schule buildings around it, but in between there are also these investment city developments that are not really beautiful, and they have to work on it at the moment because also of this climate change challenges, and there's not too much greenery or parks. They need more of that, because I think the thinking was we have these really green, nice outskirts and the mountains, and we just go out for the green, and then the rest is where we live. But in the pandemic, everybody experienced it's also very important to have more greenery next to the house and more public space also next to the house and not somewhere in the mountain. So I think there's a lot to do for Graz at the moment to develop the things further.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I think it's just, thank you very much, because for me it was a real eye-opener about what's happening in Graz. Really amazing, because for us Brits we tend to think it's Cook's bubble at the back of the old building. So I'm really interested, and you know, Dominic, you know, fantastic, but the other buildings were all new to me. It seems as though Cook's impact was pretty minimal. Is that true, or does he really help people see alternative futures?
You mean this Kunsthaus?
Yeah.
I think the Kunsthaus was important for Graz. It was in 2003, so after the Graz school was more or less over. But it was a kind of home run, because the people were prepared for such an invention. And for the city, it was like a little bit like this Guggenheim effect, yeah? Because this spacecraft has landed in this city center, and everybody was talking about Graz. And this was important for that time and for the city. Even if the building has, of course, challenges, because at that time nobody was talking about this energy reduced consumption, and this building has a lot of challenges in that direction.
Is it presented as a sustainable building?
No,
I'm not saying it is.
no,
I'm
but
just
but
making sure that
everybody
people haven't
loves it.
mistaken it for that.
Everybody loves it. It's not at all a sustainable building.
No. I mean, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
It's good that there's no confusion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know if this will make sense, but there's something, if you look at if I look at the things that happen after the high optimistic period post-war, in one pattern I see in quite a lot of Austrian architecture is a kind of, when everyone's building a lot, is a kind of antipathy to the right angle. Almost in quite a lot of Austrian architecture, I see this kind of exploration of broken geometries in some way. Both people you associate with dominate, but also in lots of other practices. Is that fair? Is that a fair thing to see? Is that being noticed, or is that part of the kind of advanced architecture culture? Because there isn't quite the same thing in Britain. That's not something that architects went for so much.
Yeah, but a little bit later came the projects by Tschumi, Rem Koolhaas, Hadid, all these people that were also famous for deconstructivism.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit a similar direction at that time.
To permeate the culture more than like these few architects doing stuff, like quite a lot of ordinary buildings. Maybe I've not been to Graz, but
yeah, but if you go there today and you look up the buildings that they're building today, they're really like straight.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was a certain period of time.
Yeah, I'm thinking of what Simon said about the counterculture. You know, how come the counterculture never really embedded itself in architecture as it did in filmmaking or music or literature? So it had a colossal impact. And you know, I think what I certainly found interesting. I mean, I know very little about Graz. Thank you. I must do a bit more study there, but I found absolutely extraordinary that Cookie's fennel bulb or heart transplant was built almost 40 years after his counterculture. It was kind of almost as if it was out of its time. As if, I mean, I know that this wonderful building that you showed from Dominic took, you know, what, nearly 20 odd years to build, but you know, this building seemed, I couldn't understand the patronage of it at all, and how a building that came out of something 40 years previously could then find itself being built. It might just be that the counterculture is yet to be built. I don't know. But, but if that's the counterculture, it's not the counterculture that I kind of was hoping for. The counterculture I was hoping for is the counterculture that we see in you know, in filmmaking. You know, the whole notion about space and thought and politics, which just doesn't seem to translate into the built form.
So what is the question?
The question is, why did they build? Why do you think they built a building that was 30 years old? Or 40 years old? Because when Warren Chalk was doing the drawings, you know, that was what, 64, 65?
Mm-hmm.
Why did your city build a 40-year-old design?
I don't know.
You don't know?
No.
Okay, I'll stop.
But I mean, isn't that it's quite difficult to find a well-funded counterculture? It's a sort of contradiction in terms almost. That by the time the counterculture is well-funded enough to do a major building, it's no longer counter. It's subsumed in mainstream.
The establishment.
Yeah. Also beholden to the mainstream.
From what you
One
said,
book had it, commodify your dissent. Yeah. You had the dissent in 1964 when you commodify it in
2004. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not exactly the same. It has been modified, of course. Yeah.
But it does seem unlikely. Well, is it unlikely in what seems, from what you're saying, a very conservative city in a very conservative country?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, it is kind of.
Yeah, it was just for this cultural city event. Yeah. And I think if this wouldn't have happened, at the same time, they wouldn't have built it. But also Graz is very proud to be called one city of design in Europe. So they're really looking after also having a lot of different creative events in the city. So you have music festivals, electronic festivals. You have this Steirische Herbst, which is a documenta in Austria there with different artists from the international scene. There are a lot of different traditional but also very fancy new festivals, events that are happening there. So this is also something that I really like of the city, that there's a lot of artistic events are happening, and also this interdisciplinary working together. So also we as House of Architecture, we are working with other disciplines together and exchanging ideas and events and talk to each other. And this is something very special, I think. It's even also in Berlin, it's not so common.
I mean, it's interesting, it's a relatively small city, so it sort of makes it more, perhaps it makes it more tangible.
You know, for good and for bad. Because if it's a small city and if you dislike someone, it's also a problem.
Because in London you still go to a different part of town,
Yeah.
go south of the river.
Very unlikely ever to cross paths.
Yeah.
But I suppose it seems to me quite interesting that, in a way, what you sketched out was this sort of these projects with a sort of linguistic, idiomatic kind of similarity, some of which is sort of quite formalist and artistic in intent, some of which is quite socially engaged, and some of which actually has, you know, kind of pioneering environmental agenda. In a way, it almost suggests that the sort of architectural language and what it's sort of trying to carry are quite detached from each other.
True, yeah.
That's absolutely true, isn't it? Mm-hmm. You continuously hear people using exactly the same justification for two completely different results, or the completely opposite justification for identical things.
Yeah.
There is that slippage between language and stuff.
Which I think is kind of a really interesting lesson from this body of work.
Yeah. The bit I'd love to hear more about, to know more about the participation, because I mean, in a way, that's, and the odd thing was that you showed that sketch of a plan of a house that looked relatively radical with its kind of curved walls and all that kind of blob-like plan, but it was preceded by what looked like quite a straightforward elevation, and they were the same thing, or they're not the same. There was that sort of terrace of coloured houses.
This is totally different offices, and the one with the curved walls was one of the first projects for housing that Alfred Huth and Dominic did together. So I think the reason why it was also that Dominic was involved, and he wanted it to be in a certain aesthetic. And the later projects by Alfred Huth, they were a little bit more common, so to say.
Yes, thank you very much for
Yeah, thank you. So let's have a drink.